Welcome back to the Collegians Summit, Phyllis, Schlafly, Eagles, 29th. And I think, if I can say, it's already our best ever. We've got the best guests. We're figuring out these issues. I just want to encourage our collegians. Hans von Spakovsky, our next guest, has written on the election issues for probably close to 2 decades. He can correct me if I'm a little off, but he served at the FEC, the Federal Election Commission. He's at the Heritage Foundation, works in the Ed Meese Center there. He has been writing on these issues long before 2020, long even before 2016, talking about all of the problems and issues surrounding elections. So it's not a new subject to him. His newest book, let me get the title right, Our Broken Elections, How the Left Changed the Way You Vote. So welcome back, Hans. How are you?
Ed, I'm doing just great. Thanks for having me back.
For college students that have only heard in the last 20 months that the elections are perfect, there's no problems. Why is everybody talking like this?
Right.
There's nothing been proved in the courts. Can you just point out, not that 2020, let's even talk about 2020. Let's just start with 2012 and go, or 2000. Go back in history. Every election has had some issues, right? The question is whether we have a system that's getting worse or getting better, that's getting more transparent, auditable, and has confidence. But tell our collegians, if you're just a new kid and you haven't heard this, there's a history to this.
Oh, no, there is. You said go back to 2000. In 1997, the Miami Herald won a Pulitzer Prize for an in-depth investigation of the mayor's race in Miami. They uncovered so much fraud that a judge overturned the election and said at least 5,000 fraudulent ballots been cast in that election. Now, for those who say 1997 is ancient history, just go back 4 years, right? 2018, our midterm congressional elections, last time we had them.
Right.
Election was overturned in North Carolina, a congressional race.
Right.
Because of absentee ballot fraud. And just within the last couple of weeks, a city council race in Compton, California. Lots of folks know that because of the movie, right? Straight Outta Compton.
Straight Outta Compton.
City council race there was just overturned because of absentee ballot fraud. And just a week or so ago, a former Democratic congressman in Pennsylvania who had become a political consultant pleaded guilty to bribing election officials to stuff fraudulent ballots into ballot boxes in multiple elections for multiple candidates in multiple precincts.
So now tell our collegians not to give up hope, that somehow the system works, it's going to work anyway. I mean, or is it? I mean,
well, what I'll say about that is, look, the one good thing that came out of the 2020 election was it finally made state legislators in a lot of places realize, we do have holes in the system that need to be fixed. And the result of that was that something like 24 states have passed election reforms, good ones. And you know how we know they're good ones? Because the left has been complaining vociferously about them. Joe Biden, as you know, went down to Atlanta and said, well, if you're in favor of a voter ID law and election reforms, that's Jim Crow. Well, those reforms that they've passed are good reforms. They have improved the system. So I actually have a lot more confidence in the upcoming midterm elections than I did in the 2020 election.
We're talking again, Hans von Spakovsky. I'll put up on social media and all. His Twitter handle is von Spakovsky. Also, heritage.org is a website. So we're talking about a theme of our Collegians Summit is the importance for young people to not worry about, to be vigilant. We use a phrase from Patrick Henry, yes. Vigilant, active, and brave. What does the future, what do you say to young people about how to be active for this time? And I'd say it like this. It looks like there's 27 or 150 efforts to try to fight for election integrity. I mean, right. We've been parts of coalitions, right. And yet there's not a clear vision for it, right? Is it poll watchers? Doesn't feel like poll watchers worked when the poll watchers were told to stand across the auditorium 300 yards away, right? Is it election systems? Dominion just had the government say their systems are hackable in certain states. I don't even know what that means, but that's what came out of the government, right? So what is it young people should be aimed towards if they care about having our election system work?
Well, the things that need to be done, frankly, are all of the above. Okay.
Okay.
But let me tell you the recommendations I would make. First of all, if you can get a job working in a polling place on election day, it's one day, yeah, you have to do training.
Right.
Do it. Because then you're in a polling place and you can make sure, for example, that if you're in a state that requires an ID, they're actually checking them when they come in.
Right.
Okay? If you can't do that, be a poll watcher. And I'll give you a good example of a poll watcher, college student. You recall this. In 2008, there was a big incident in Philadelphia. Two members of the new Black Panther Party stood in front of a polling place in black paramilitary uniforms, one of them with a nightstick, and they were yelling racial epithets and threatening voters and poll watchers going in. And a college student who had volunteered to be a poll watcher got out his iPhone, took a video of it, and recorded it. And the result of that was a lawsuit by the U.S. Justice Department against the new Black Panther Party and lots of publicity. This would not have stopped. The lawsuit would not have happened if that college student had not been there to be a poll watcher.
Hans von Spakovsky, I should have said, also writes on constitutional issues and has lots behind that expertise, not just elections. So on that note, why can't it be that every poll watcher can record everything? I think there's rules that say you can't, right?
Well, it depends on the state. Some states, unfortunately, have passed laws not allowing cameras. One of my biggest recommendations for years is that ought to be allowed. In fact, there ought to be live cameras in every polling place. I'll tell you why they passed it. It's because election officials they're afraid of being caught and embarrassed by the mistakes they're making. That restriction only applies in certain states. Depends on the law, but that's one of the things that folks ought to get their state legislators to change.
If you're a college student and your first time to vote in the presidential election is maybe it's coming up, right, in 2024, and you look up and you see France does their elections in one day, 71 million people, not 330, whatever million we are, but they do it in one day with very little absentee balloting, almost all in person. Why can't we get to that? And I think I asked you on the radio a few days ago when we talked. I know we don't want to federalize too many things because, as you point out, when the Democrats showed their hand, their federalizing of elections would be disastrous. But can't we get to where we have our national elections be one day? Maybe even conservatives could say, we'll give you a holiday, right? Or something that makes it, and then everybody vote in person.
The answer to that is yes. And the reason is, remember, the reason we have a particular day in November for federal elections is because the Constitution gives Congress the ability to do what? Set the date of federal elections. And all they would have to do is tweak the language of that a little bit to say election day means one day. It does not include 4 weeks of early voting prior to an election.
John, thoughts on elections?
And then you mentioned the election in France that we witnessed a few weeks ago, and they not only all voted on one day, but the results were reported within a few hours. Now, why does it take days or even weeks, sometimes even up to a month, to determine the results? We've seen that happen in Pennsylvania and New York State, for example.
Because France and other countries in Europe are smart enough not to allow absentee ballots. That's why. Because everybody's voting on one day, they can immediately count all the votes. We've moved so far into pushing people to vote by mail, which is an insecure way of voting. Brings up all kinds of problems. It takes much longer to process absentee ballots, and what's gotten even worse is, as you know, many states have now extended the deadline. It used to be, even the states that allowed absentee ballots, it had to be in by the end of election day, right?
Right.
So now states are saying, 3 days, 5 days after election day, we'll still count it. All of that delays election results.
Is the when you look back again, Hans von Spakovsky, also an attorney, and I mean, at what the left did, the stuff they admitted they did that was legal, meaning they went in and they got the Pennsylvania courts to give them law changes that arguably were unconstitutional, but it never got adjudicated that way, and the Supreme Court never took it up. When you look back at that, Hans, do you say, part of you say, yep, it may not have been illegal, and it may have been skeezy, it may have been dishonorable, but it was good, smart, hardball politics?
Yeah, it was, even though it shouldn't have happened.
Right.
Right. I mean, the best example in Pennsylvania was Pennsylvania had a law saying absentee ballots have to be in the hands of election officials by the end of Election Day. And instead you had state officials coming in and say, oh, we're just going to ignore that law. We're going to keep counting ballots coming in for several days after Election Day. The voters didn't do anything wrong, but those election officials changed the rules set by the state legislature, and those ballots shouldn't have been counted.
Hans, you also, though, so you played a role you were nominated by George W. Bush in 2005, right, to the FEC.
Correct.
So you would have been identified as a Republican, a lawyer active in that. Then you were an advisor to Trump in his campaign. You've written these books. One of the books before this most recent one, the most recent one is Our Broken Elections. One of the other ones, I did this on the radio with you, that had to do with the bureaucrats, who's counting our votes, and you were talking about who was actually in charge. So you're a publicly identified guy casting at least light on the election system. But after 2020, if you said what you said for 10 or 20 years before that, now you were a traitor.
Yeah,
right? Not you necessarily, but
right.
People that say what you said for 20 years are now traitors. And I don't know if you got subpoenaed or got pulled before the select committee. You probably were smart enough not to write any memos that you sent into the White House. But I mean, my point is that what you used to say as a discussion, as a serious conservative academic with a background, MIT graduate, blah, 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 now you say that and you're quite literally called a traitor.
Right. No, in fact, not too long ago, Facebook removed an interview that was done of me where I was talking with a guy about election fraud. And look, we weren't even talking about the 2020 election. I was just relating to him actual proven cases of fraud in other cases, like the ones I told you about, like in Miami and stuff. And Facebook pulled it because, well, my goodness, you can't relate actual facts about real cases of election fraud. That's just not acceptable.
It's incredible. Our theme, I mentioned earlier, for this Patrick Henry speech from 1775, "Give me liberty and give me death," the famous part of it. But he also says, "The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone; it is to the vigilant, the active, the brave." Young people are pretty impressionable, our collegians, and they look up and say, "The systems look pretty rigged, right?" If you're Hillary, you don't get any trouble for doing things that if you're Mike Flynn, you're on the hot seat. If you're the Marine General at Brookings, you get to resign, but you're probably not going to get charged. I'm not arguing to charge anybody. I'm saying the people look up and they say, the kids especially are impressionable, they look up and say, the system's rigged. How do we go about telling everyone, but young people, the election system is, I don't know, better than the rest of the world and we can make it good again? I don't know. What do you do? How do you encourage them?
Folks shouldn't have this general cynical view that it's all bad. Okay, election fraud does occur, but does it occur massively in all our elections? No. The place where it's particularly possible and dangerous is in close elections, when the margins are small. And what folks need to do is get an education, pick your profession, and then go make a difference.
Yeah.
Go into the media. Go into the media so you can actually get accurate reporting. Get a government job as a lawyer at the Justice Department so we'll actually get some good people into the bureaucratic ranks. There's all kinds of things people can do to make a difference, and you just gotta persevere and move ahead so that we can replace all the crazies that have gotten into those kind of positions.
Have you seen the 2000 Mules movie?
I have, because in fact I'm interviewed in it.
Oh, you are? Okay, I didn't see that. I don't know. What I tell people about 2000 Mules is it indicates a problem that nobody's clarified yet.
No, that's exactly it. Because what that movie does is it raises serious questions about large numbers of absentee ballots that may have been fraudulently obtained and submitted. And what should happen, what a filmmaker cannot do, is all of these mules, and the mules were these individuals who went from one drop box to another.
Right.
They need to be identified, which they can do through the video surveillance and their cell phones.
Right.
And they need to be brought in front of a convened grand jury, which only law enforcement can do, and questioned. Who was paying you? Where'd you get these ballots? Were they legitimate ballots? Were they fraudulent ballots? those are the kind of questions that I'll be asked to investigate the questions raised, and of course, that's not happening.
If the Republicans win the House and Senate,
Right.
especially I guess either body, what could they do in terms of investigation? The January 6th Select Committee seems to me to be so un-American because there's no back and forth. Even when Biden had the Judiciary Committee, that Republicans could ask questions. Even when Grassley was in charge of the Judiciary Committee, and there were confirmations, there were going to be questions, right? You may have been losing. Coney Barrett was confirmed, but there was chance to engage in a public back and forth. The Select Committee doesn't have that, and the Republicans it's better that the Republicans aren't going to do the same thing. But what could they investigate? If you could say, guys, go look at one thing about our election system and find out what the deal is. Is there one area of law that would be more important than others, or area of the elections that would be more important than others?
I think they ought to try to, through the 2000 Mules movie, I would try to get the names of some of these mules and subpoena them and bring them in to question them, get the names of the 5 organizations unidentified in the movie where these guys were all going,
right,
to apparently pick up these ballots and pull them in and interrogate them. By the way, it's not really the January 6th committee, it's the January 6th House Un-American Activities.
Yeah, exactly. That's
just
what
like just like Senator McCarthy.
Exactly, it feels like that. John, any thoughts on elections?
What would you say, Hans, about the problem, and it's been identified as a problem for decades, that voter registrations include tens of thousands, or perhaps even hundreds of thousands, or perhaps even millions of people who have moved away or are deceased, and which raises the possibility of somebody else casting a ballot in their name.
Yeah.
How can that be stopped once and for all?
That is a real,
or registered in more than one state.
Yeah, that's a real problem. It's one that can be fixed, and the way to fix it is, in December, the Heritage Foundation, where I work, released its new election integrity scorecard, which rates every single state on how good or how bad its election laws are. And one of the things we rate them on are what they do to maintain their voter rolls. And we have a list of like 20 different things that they ought to be doing. And a lot of it is just common sense. I mean, the most obvious one to tell you is every state ought to be automatically comparing its statewide voter registration list with its DMV list every month to find people who've moved out of the state. Some states aren't even doing that. I mean, it's just very obvious things that ought to be done, and if they did them, then the voter rolls would be a lot cleaner, and the kind of things you're talking about would not be able to happen.
Can that be done, though, without having a unique ID for every citizen, and a master roll of citizens, which, of course, we don't have?
Right. Well, one of the ways that
exist.
states are doing this without breaking federal law is a lot of states are putting in a requirement that you provide the last 4 digits of your Social Security number, because that way they'll know whether a John M. Smith, who's registered in Alabama, is or is not the same John M. Smith registered in Georgia, because the chances of them having the last same 4 digits are pretty minimal.
Right.
And that's one of the ways of doing that.
By the way, can I say John will please appreciate this, but I was reading a novel, William Kennedy, the Ironweed. It's about Albany, and in the book, it's from the 1910s or so. It talks about one of the main characters, how he registered to vote 21 times.
Yes.
Because the system, the organized, it said vote 21 times. He got in trouble with the court. My point is only that I used to say this when I ran the election board in St. Louis. And Acorn dumped 2,000 registrations, and they did, and we threw them all out. And someone said, just because they're voter registration fraud doesn't mean that they're committing voter fraud. And I said, what else would they do it for, right? I mean, you don't do it for fun. You don't get any more money out of the census by registering voters. It's clearly positioned. Now, how do you, Hans, at this moment, now with your arc of history, you've seen it and experience, how do the electric machines fit in? Because any computer is hackable. That's just the facts of life. That doesn't, just like any ballot could be stuffed, ballot box could be stuffed, or any ballot could be insecure if you didn't track the ballots 100 years ago. But the computers are easy for us to worry about, what do you do about it?
Two things.
Okay.
One, you ensure that both the electronic voting machines that are in a polling place and the computers at the central headquarters where votes are counted are not connected to the internet, in fact don't have the capability to be connected to the internet, and are not part of a network. For example, inside the county government, that if somebody can get into that network, they can then get into that.
Right.
The second thing is, if you're going to use electronic voting machines, the only kind that should be used are one that after you cast your ballot, it prints out a paper ballot with the names of the candidates you've chosen, and then it's run through a computer scanner that reads the names. Not a barcode, nothing like that, but only can read those names. That way you've got an audit trail. To ensure that if somebody says, oh, somebody got into the electronics system, they hacked it, they changed the vote, what have you got? You got the paper printouts that you can hand count.
Young people, more than John, are into blockchain and Bitcoin, and is there a way that blockchain or something, that some kind of electronic verification is the way that I can know I voted?
A lot of folks are saying that they've come up with ways to do that, but so far nobody has proven that they've got a really secure way of doing that. And for everybody who uses their phones constantly to do all kinds of things over the internet, every task force that has looked at this, including the National Science Foundation, has said the internet is too insecure and too dangerous to have internet online voting.
Yeah, feels like it would be, but I mean, I know that I run into young people that talk about the blockchain's going to solve all our problems. I don't know anyway.
Plus, you can't have a secret ballot by voting on the internet.
Yeah, that's one of the big problems. Yeah.
All right, Hans von Spakovsky, thank you. As always, heritage.org is the website. You can track down him. I'll put it up on social media. His book, Our Broken Elections, How the Left Changed the Way You Vote, clearly a treasonous, traitorous book designed to distract us from I don't know what. But you'll be busy. You'll always be busy every 2 and 4 years. So we'll look forward. By the way, I hear from some people, they say, November 2022, there's no way it's going to be free and fair election. It's going to be all sorts of corruption. Do you subscribe to the theory that it's harder to steal a bunch of congressional races? It's just harder to localize the problem?
Yeah,
you do?
Of course.
So,
yeah. And I'm telling you, things have improved. Things have improved, particularly in places like Georgia, where now you have to have an ID to vote through absentee ballots. That's a big correction.
Uh-huh. Okay, Hans is confident. All right, we will thank you. Thanks very much, and we'll put all that up on social media. We will take another break here, and we'll come back. It's the 29th Phyllis, Schlafly, Eagles Collegians Summit. We hope you're learning a lot, learning from these experts on this. We've got some elected officials. Our schedule's been a little jumbled because just across town here, a few of elected officials they got called in for votes, so they have to go vote, and so we'll get to them as we get to them, and we'll take a break right now and be back in a few moments. Stay tuned.